Mom, are you excited for tomorrow? My daughter asked me the night before her wedding. I remember smiling and telling her that I had been waiting for that day for years. What I didn't know was that by sunrise, I would wake up to a nightmare that would change the way I saw my own child forever. My name is Margaret Dawson. I'm 68 years old, and until that morning, I believed there was nothing I wouldn't do for my daughter Emily. I had spent months helping her prepare for the wedding she always dreamed of. The venue overlooking Lake Michigan. The white roses flown in from Oregon. The string quartet she wanted after seeing a video online. I paid for more than I should have, but I never complained. Emily was my only child, and seeing her happy felt worth every dollar. The night before the ceremony, I stayed at the hotel where the bridal party was getting ready. Emily insisted it would be special if we all spent the final evening together. I thought it sounded wonderful. We laughed during dinner. We took pictures in the lobby. She even hugged me before heading to her suite. "I love you, Mom," she said. Those words stayed with me as I fell asleep. At 5:30 the next morning, I woke before my alarm. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. For a brief moment, I felt peaceful. Then I reached toward the nightstand where I always kept my wig. My hand touched nothing. I frowned and searched again. Still nothing. I sat up straighter. The custom wig I wore for special occasions had disappeared. It wasn't inexpensive. It had been carefully fitted months earlier, so I could feel confident standing beside my daughter on her wedding day. I checked the bathroom, the dresser, my suitcase, every drawer in the room. It was nowhere. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Trying not to panic, I walked toward the closet to retrieve my dress. The moment I opened the garment bag, my breath caught. A dark stain stretched across the front of the pale blue fabric. The delicate lace near the neckline had been damaged. The dress I had planned to wear only hours later was ruined. I stared at it in disbelief. My hands trembled slightly. I couldn't understand what had happened. Housekeeping had no reason to touch it. No stranger had access to my room. Someone had entered deliberately. Someone had known exactly what that dress meant to me. A soft knock sounded at the door. Relief washed over me. Maybe someone had found my wig. Maybe there was an explanation. I hurried across the room and opened the door. Emily stood there in a silk robe, already glowing with excitement. For a second I felt reassured. Then she looked past me and saw the dress hanging from the closet door. Her eyes moved to my bare head, and she smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a concerned smile. It was small. Quiet. Almost satisfied. "Good morning, Mom," she said calmly. I searched her face for confusion or sympathy, but neither appeared. "Emily," I whispered, "my wig is gone. And look at my dress." She tilted her head slightly. "That's unfortunate," she replied. "Unfortunate. Not shocking. Not upsetting. Just unfortunate." The word echoed in my mind. I felt as though I were standing on unstable ground. Something was terribly wrong. My daughter should have been horrified. Instead, she seemed oddly relaxed. Then she glanced at her phone and took a step backward. "I should get downstairs," she said. "The photographers will be here soon." Before leaving, she looked at me one more time. That same smile lingered on her face. The door closed softly behind her. I stood frozen in the middle of the room. In that moment, a realization settled over me with chilling clarity. This wasn't an accident. And whatever had happened that morning, my daughter already knew about it. I remained standing in that hotel room for several minutes after Emily left. The silence felt heavier than before. I looked at the damaged dress hanging from the closet door and then at my reflection in the mirror. For years I had taught myself not to jump to conclusions. Life had a way of creating misunderstandings that looked worse than they really were. But the expression on Emily's face would not leave my mind. A loving daughter would have asked questions. She would have offered help. She would have looked upset. Instead, she had looked prepared. I picked up my phone and called the front desk. My voice was calm as I explained that several personal items were missing from my room. The young woman who answered sounded concerned and promised to send a manager immediately. 20 minutes later, a polite man named Eric arrived. He listened carefully while examining the room. When I mentioned the wig and the dress, he frowned. Only a limited number of people have access to guest floors this early, he said. We will review security records. I thanked him and sat on the edge of the bed after he left. The room suddenly felt unfamiliar. I remembered the excitement I had felt only days earlier. Emily had always talked about her dream wedding. When she was 12 years old, she used to cut pictures from bridal magazines and tape them inside a scrapbook. Every page was filled with notes about flowers, dresses, music, and venues. Back then, she would sit beside me on the living room floor and ask my opinion on every detail. I smiled at those memories now, but the smile did not last long. Somewhere over the years, something had changed. At first, the changes were small. Emily stopped calling as often. Family dinners became shorter. Holidays felt more formal. I blamed adulthood. I blamed work. I blamed the distance that naturally grows between parents and children. What I never considered was that she might be pulling away on purpose. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Rose Bennett, my oldest friend. She had known Emily since the day she was born. "How is the morning going?" she wrote. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Something strange happened. Can you come to my room?" Her reply arrived less than a minute later. "On my way." Rose knocked 10 minutes later. The moment she stepped inside, her smile disappeared. She looked from my uncovered head to the dress hanging nearby. "Margaret," she whispered. "What happened?" I explained everything. She listened without interrupting. The more I spoke, the more troubled she looked. When I finished, she crossed her arms and stared at the floor. "Rose?" I asked quietly. "What is it?" She hesitated. For the first time in nearly 40 years of friendship, she seemed unsure whether she should speak. "There is something I have been meaning to tell you," she finally said. I thought maybe I was overreacting. I hoped I was wrong. My stomach tightened. Rose pulled a chair closer and sat down. "A few weeks ago, I overheard a conversation during one of the wedding planning meetings." She paused. Emily was talking with two bridesmaids. I felt my pulse quicken. "What did she say?" Rose looked directly into my eyes. "She said she did not want you drawing attention away from her on the wedding day." The room seemed colder. "Drawing attention away from her?" I repeated. Rose nodded slowly. "One of the bridesmaids mentioned how brave you were for attending such a big event after everything you have been through. Emily laughed and said she was tired of people feeling sorry for you." I stared at her, unable to speak. Rose lowered her voice even further. "Margaret, there is more. And I think you need to hear it before this wedding begins." Rose took a slow breath before continuing. I could see the discomfort in her eyes. She hated conflict. She always had. That was why I knew whatever she was about to tell me had been weighing on her for weeks. "One of the bridesmaids said your story was inspiring," Rose said quietly. "She mentioned how many people admired your strength." Emily rolled her eyes. I felt something sink inside my chest. Rose looked down at her hands. She said she was tired of every family event turning into a celebration of Margaret Dawson. I let out a small laugh that sounded unfamiliar even to me. A celebration of me. The words were absurd. For years I had done everything possible to stay in the background. I attended birthdays without expecting attention. I helped organize holidays and made sure everyone else felt special. I had spent most of my life making room for other people. "What else did she say?" I asked. Rose hesitated again. She said she wanted one day that was completely hers. One day where nobody looked at you and felt sorry for you. I turned toward the window. Below us, hotel staff moved briskly across the property preparing for the ceremony. White chairs had been arranged in perfect rows, facing the lake. Guests would begin arriving in a few hours. Everything looked beautiful from a distance. "I never asked anyone to feel sorry for me," I said softly. Rose nodded. "I know." The room fell silent. As I stood there, memories began resurfacing. Small moments I had ignored. Comments I had brushed aside. Last Thanksgiving, Emily insisted that family photos should be limited because she wanted a cleaner look for social media. At the time, I thought nothing of it. During Christmas, She suggested I arrive after most of the guests because parking would be easier. A few months earlier, she encouraged me to skip a charity gala because she said it would probably be exhausting for me. Each incident seemed harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Rose must have seen the realization on my face. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I think she has been embarrassed by the attention you receive." I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Attention?" I asked. "I am a retired school librarian who spends weekends tending roses." Rose reached over and squeezed my hand. "You are also someone people admire." I looked away. After my illness years earlier, I had shared my experience at community events and local support groups. I never considered it remarkable. I simply wanted to help others feel less alone. Apparently, Emily saw it differently. My phone suddenly vibrated on the nightstand. A new message appeared from the hotel manager. "Security review in progress. We found something that may be relevant. Please call when available." My heartbeat quickened. Rose noticed my expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked. I handed her the phone. She read the message and frowned. "You should call." I nodded and dialed the number. Eric answered almost immediately. His tone was professional but noticeably cautious. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "we reviewed hallway footage from early this morning." My grip tightened around the phone. "Did you find anything?" There was a brief pause. "Yes." The single word seemed to fill the room. "At approximately 4:42 this morning, someone entered your room using a temporary access card." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "Who?" Another pause followed. "I would prefer to discuss that in person." My stomach dropped. Beside me, Rose looked equally alarmed. "Mr. Collins," I said carefully. "Was it a hotel employee?" "No, ma'am." I closed my eyes. Somehow, that answer felt worse. "Then who was it?" For a moment, all I heard was the distant sound of waves beyond the hotel grounds. Then Eric spoke. "The person on the footage appears to be a member of the bridal party. And Mrs. Dawson, I think you need to see the recording yourself." Rose and I went downstairs immediately. The hotel manager met us near a private office behind the reception area. He looked uncomfortable, as if he wished he did not have to be part of what was happening. Without saying much, he led us into a small conference room and placed a laptop on the table. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Eric clicked a few keys and turned the screen toward us. The footage showed the hallway outside my room. The timestamp read 4:42 a.m. The corridor was quiet. A few seconds later, a woman appeared on the screen. She wore a bridesmaid robe and carried a small tote bag. Even before she moved closer to the camera, I recognized her. It was Ashley Monroe, one of Emily's closest friends and a bridesmaid in the wedding. I watched as Ashley stopped outside my door and used an access card. The door opened. She slipped inside. My stomach tightened. The footage continued. Ashley remained in my room for nearly 8 minutes. Then she emerged carrying the same tote bag. Except now it appeared fuller than before. She looked around briefly before walking away. Nobody else entered the hallway. Nobody else approached my room. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Rose let out a slow breath beside me. Eric paused the video. "There is more," he said carefully. He switched to another camera angle showing a service elevator. Ashley entered alone. Moments later, another figure joined her. My chest felt hollow as I watched the second woman step into view. "Emily." Neither woman appeared surprised to see the other. They spoke briefly. Then Ashley handed Emily something from the tote bag. The image. Quality was not perfect, but I recognized it immediately. It was my wig. Nobody spoke in the room. The silence felt endless. I stared at the frozen image on the screen. Emily's hand rested on the item for a moment before she placed it inside another bag and walked away. My daughter had known exactly where my wig was. She had known before she knocked on my door. She had known when she looked at my ruined dress. She had known when she called the situation unfortunate. Suddenly, every strange moment from the morning made sense. Rose covered her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Eric quietly closed the laptop. "Mrs. Dawson, I am very sorry." I nodded, but I could barely hear him. My thoughts had drifted somewhere else. Not to anger. Not yet. Instead, I felt grief. Deep, unexpected grief. The kind that arrives when a truth you never wanted to believe finally becomes impossible to deny. I thought about the little girl who used to leave handwritten Mother's Day cards on my kitchen table. The teenager who called me whenever she was nervous before a school presentation. The young woman who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. Where had that girl gone? Or had I simply refused to see who she had become? We returned to my room a few minutes later. Rose remained unusually quiet. I knew she was trying to protect me from saying what we were both thinking. Finally, she sat beside me on the bed. "Margaret," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" I looked at the damaged dress hanging in the closet. Then I looked at the empty space where my wig should have been. A few hours earlier, I would have done almost anything to preserve Emily's perfect wedding day. Now, I was not so sure. My phone suddenly buzzed with a new message. It was from Daniel Harper, the groom. The text was simple. "Mrs. Dawson, have you seen Emily this morning? Something strange is going on. We need to talk." I read the message twice. Then a third time. Another cold feeling settled over me. If Daniel believed something was wrong, then whatever Emily had planned might be far bigger than a missing wig and a ruined dress. And for the first time that morning, I began to wonder how many other secrets were hiding behind my daughter's smile. For several seconds, I stared at Daniel's message without responding. During all the months of wedding planning, he had always been respectful and kind. He was not the type of man who created drama or exaggerated problems. If he believed something was wrong, I took it seriously. Rose watched me carefully as I typed a short reply asking where we could meet. The response came almost immediately. He was waiting in a small conference room near the ballroom. I told Rose everything. She insisted on coming with me, but I shook my head. "Not yet," I said softly. "I need to hear this myself first." A few minutes later, I walked through the hotel corridor alone. Guests were beginning to arrive. Families carried garment bags and flower boxes. Laughter echoed through the lobby. Everywhere I looked, people seemed excited about the celebration ahead. None of them knew that my entire world had shifted before breakfast. When I reached the conference room, Daniel was already there. He stood when I entered. The moment he saw me, concern crossed his face. Unlike Emily, he did not pretend everything was normal. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "thank you for coming." I sat across from him at the table. "What is going on?" I asked. Daniel looked exhausted. His tie was loosened and dark circles sat beneath his eyes. "I am not completely sure," he admitted, "but several things have happened over the last few days that do not make sense." He opened his phone and scrolled through several messages. 3 vendors contacted me directly this week asking about last-minute changes. I frowned. What kind of changes? Seating arrangements, guest access, photography instructions. He hesitated. Your name kept coming up. My stomach tightened. Daniel slid the phone across the table. I read the messages one by one. One photographer had been instructed not to include me in certain family portraits unless specifically requested. Another vendor had received instructions to move my assigned seat away from the head table. A third message mentioned special accommodations in case I became emotional during the ceremony. Emotional. The word felt familiar. Rose had told me about Emily's comments only an hour earlier. Suddenly those comments seemed less like careless remarks and more like part of a larger plan. Did Emily authorize these changes? I asked quietly. Daniel nodded. According to the vendors, yes. He looked deeply uncomfortable. At first I assumed there was a misunderstanding. Then yesterday I overheard a conversation. I looked up. What conversation? Daniel leaned forward. Emily was speaking with Ashley. They did not know I was nearby. He paused. Ashley joked that after today, nobody would be talking about you anymore. My chest felt heavy. Daniel continued. Emily laughed and said that was exactly the point. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Outside the conference room, I could hear distant music as staff tested sound equipment for the ceremony. It sounded strangely far away. Daniel, I asked carefully, why are you telling me this now? His answer came without hesitation. Because I do not like what I am seeing. He rubbed his forehead. And because the woman I am supposed to marry today does not seem like the person I thought she was. For the first time that morning, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of the wedding. Fear of the truth. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small flash drive. He placed it on the table between us. "There is one more thing," he said. "A bridesmaid came to me about 30 minutes ago. She was upset. She said she could not stay quiet anymore." I stared at the flash drive. "What is on it?" Daniel swallowed hard. "A video." The room suddenly felt very still. "A video of what?" I asked. Daniel looked directly at me. "Of something Emily never wanted you to see." For a moment, I simply stared at the flash drive resting on the table. It looked insignificant. A small piece of plastic no larger than my thumb. Yet somehow it carried enough weight to make Daniel question the woman he was about to marry. "Can we see it?" I asked. Daniel nodded. He opened a laptop and inserted the drive. Neither of us spoke while the file loaded. When the video appeared on the screen, I immediately recognized the room. It was one of the bridal suites on the same hotel floor. The recording had been made the previous evening. Emily sat on a sofa surrounded by several bridesmaids. Music played softly in the background. Everyone appeared relaxed. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Ashley walked into view, holding my wig. The room erupted in laughter. My stomach dropped. I watched as Ashley placed it on a mannequin stand near the wall. Someone made a joke about hiding it until after the ceremony. More laughter followed. I kept waiting for Emily to stop them, to tell them it had gone too far. Instead, she leaned back and smiled. "Tomorrow is supposed to be about me," she said. The words were calm and clear. Not my mother. Nobody challenged her. One bridesmaid looked uncomfortable, but the others remained silent. Emily continued speaking. "Every event turns into a conversation about how strong she is, how brave she is, how inspiring she is. I am tired of competing with that." I felt something break inside me, not because of the cruelty, because of the resentment. All those years, I had believed I was supporting my daughter. I never imagined she viewed my existence as competition. The video continued. Someone asked whether I would be upset. Emily shrugged. "She will survive. She always does." Another bridesmaid asked about the dress. Emily exchanged a glance with Ashley before answering. "Let us just say the photos will finally focus on the right person." The room filled with nervous laughter again. Then the recording ended. Nobody spoke. Daniel slowly closed the laptop. His face had gone pale. I sat motionless, staring at the dark screen. Oddly enough, I was not crying. The tears had disappeared somewhere between shock and acceptance. A strange calm settled over me instead. The kind of calm that comes when a painful truth finally stops hiding. "I am sorry," Daniel said quietly. "I had no idea." I nodded. Neither did I. Several seconds passed before he spoke again. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but it carried enormous weight. For years, my answer would have been immediate. Protect Emily. Excuse Emily. Give Emily another chance. But sitting there with undeniable evidence in front of me, I realized something. Every decision I made today would teach her something about consequences. If I remained silent, I would teach her that humiliation had no cost. If I exploded in anger, I would become the villain she seemed determined to create. I looked out the conference room window. Guests were arriving steadily now. Elegant dresses, dark suits, smiling families. They were all preparing to celebrate a love story. None of them knew they were walking into a performance built on deception. Finally, I turned back toward Daniel. "I am not going to scream," I said. "I am not going to ruin the ceremony." He listened carefully. "But I am not going to protect lies anymore either." Daniel lowered his eyes. I could tell he understood exactly what I meant. My phone buzzed suddenly. A text message appeared from Emily. "Mom, where are you? Everyone is looking for you." I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then another message arrived. "Please do not create unnecessary drama today." I read those words twice. Then I slowly locked the phone and placed it on the table. For the first time all morning, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood something important. Emily still believed I knew nothing, and that misunderstanding was about to become the biggest mistake she had ever made. After leaving the conference room, I returned to my hotel suite with a clarity I had not felt in years. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. All that remained was certainty. Rose was waiting when I arrived. One look at my face told her everything had changed. "You know the truth now," she said quietly. I nodded. Then I told her about the video. I told her about Daniel. I told her about the messages, the hidden plans, and the years of resentment that had finally revealed themselves. Rose listened without interruption. When I finished, she sat silently for several seconds before speaking. "What happens next?" she asked. I looked toward the window. The ceremony would begin in less than an hour. Guests were already filling the lakeside lawn. White chairs stretched across the grass in perfect rows. A string quartet played softly in the distance. Everything looked flawless. That was the irony. The more perfect the wedding appeared, the uglier the truth beneath it became. My phone continued buzzing with messages from Emily. Some sounded irritated. Others sounded concerned. None sounded sincere. She wanted to know where I was. She wanted to know why I was not answering. She wanted to know whether I planned to attend. I ignored every message. For the first time in my life, I felt no obligation to make her comfortable. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found Daniel standing outside. He looked calmer than before, but there was sadness in his eyes. "I spoke with the bridesmaid who recorded the video," he said. "She is willing to tell the truth if necessary." I nodded slowly. That was brave of her. Daniel sighed. She said she felt guilty all night. We sat together for several minutes discussing what to do. Neither of us wanted a public confrontation. Neither of us wanted shouting, accusations, or humiliation. But we also knew the truth could not remain hidden. Eventually, Daniel shared something that surprised me. "The ballroom screen is connected to the same media system being used for the wedding slideshow," he explained. "The staff already loaded the presentation." I immediately understood what he was suggesting. He did not need to say it aloud. The room fell silent. Finally, I asked, "Are you certain?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "No," he admitted. "I am not certain about anything anymore." That answer told me everything. This was no longer just about me. It was about trust. It was about honesty. It was about whether a marriage could begin with deception and still survive. 30 minutes later, guests began taking their seats. Through the window, I watched families smiling as they greeted one another. Children chased each other across the lawn. Cameras flashed. The atmosphere felt joyful. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the hotel, Emily was preparing to walk down the aisle believing she still controlled the story. She believed I would remain quiet. She believed Daniel knew nothing. She believed the morning had gone exactly as planned. Another message arrived from her. "Mom, please answer me." I stared at those words for several moments. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. Rose looked at me carefully. "Are you ready?" she asked. I took a slow breath. The answer came easier than I expected. Yes. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to hurt my daughter. I was ready because I was tired. Tired of excuses. Tired of pretending. Tired of protecting someone who had spent years pushing me aside while smiling to my face. Outside, the music grew louder. The ceremony was about to begin. And for the first time that day, I realized something important. Emily thought she had carefully planned every detail of her wedding. What she never planned for was the moment the truth decided to attend. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. Guests rose from their seats as the music drifted across the lawn. From where I stood near the back, I could see Emily stepping forward with complete confidence. Her smile was flawless. Her posture was perfect. Anyone watching would have believed they were witnessing the happiest moment of her life. For a brief second, I found myself remembering another version of her. The little girl who used to run across soccer fields searching for me in the crowd. The teenager who cried when she left for college because she was afraid of being away from home. Those memories still existed, but they felt distant now, like photographs left too long in the sun. Daniel stood at the front waiting for her. From a distance he appeared calm, but I knew better. I had seen the conflict in his eyes. The ceremony moved forward. The officiant welcomed everyone. Family members smiled. Cameras flashed. The lake shimmered behind them under the afternoon sunlight. Everything appeared beautiful. Then came the moment that changed everything. The officiant paused unexpectedly. Daniel raised a hand. Confusion spread across the faces of the guests. Emily looked surprised. She turned toward him and whispered something I could not hear. Daniel responded quietly. Then he looked toward the audiovisual booth positioned near the reception area. A signal was given. At first, people assumed the wedding slideshow was about to begin. The large display screen near the reception tent illuminated. Several guests smiled, expecting childhood photos and engagement pictures. Instead, the first image that appeared was a timestamp from the previous evening. Conversations stopped immediately. Emily's smile vanished. The video began playing. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The footage showed the bridal suite. Ashley entered carrying my wig. Laughter filled the recording. Then Emily appeared on screen. The same words I had already heard echoed across the venue. Tomorrow is supposed to be about me, not my mother. A wave of stunned silence swept through the crowd. Guests exchanged confused looks. Family members stared at the screen. Several bridesmaids lowered their eyes. The recording continued. Emily's comments about attention, the jokes, the casual dismissal of my feelings, the discussion about my dress. Every word was heard clearly. I watched the expressions around me change one by one. Shock, disbelief, sadness. Daniel never looked away from the screen. Meanwhile, Emily seemed frozen in place. The confidence she carried down the aisle disappeared completely. When the video ended, the silence felt enormous. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew where to look. Finally, Emily turned toward Daniel. Her lips moved quickly. She appeared desperate to explain. Daniel listened for a few seconds before gently shaking his head. He was not angry. In some ways, that made the moment even more powerful. He simply looked heartbroken. One of Emily's bridesmaids quietly stepped away from the wedding party. Another followed. Across the audience, I noticed guests avoiding eye contact with Emily altogether. For years, she had carefully managed how people saw her. In less than 5 minutes, that image had collapsed under the weight of her own words. Then something happened that surprised me most of all. Emily looked toward me, not toward the guests, not toward Daniel, toward me. For the first time that day, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not because she had been exposed, because she finally understood that I knew the truth. And at that moment, standing beneath the bright afternoon sky with hundreds of witnesses around us, my daughter was forced to confront the one thing she had spent years avoiding, herself. For what felt like a very long time, nobody moved. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. Even the gentle sounds of the lake seemed distant. Emily stood in the center of the ceremony space, surrounded by people who no longer knew what to think. Her carefully constructed image had shattered in front of everyone. I expected anger. I expected excuses. Instead, I saw confusion. It was as though she could not understand how the story had slipped out of her control. Daniel finally stepped forward.
His voice was calm.
"I do not think I can do this today," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her. Somehow that made his words even more powerful. Several guests lowered their heads. Others quietly looked away. Emily tried to speak. She started explaining that people had misunderstood. She said it was a joke. She said things had been taken out of context. But the problem with recorded truth is that it leaves very little room for interpretation. The guests had heard her own words. No explanation could erase them. Then Emily looked directly at me. "Mom," she said. Her voice trembled for the first time all day. "Please say something." I studied her face. For years I had rushed to rescue her whenever life became uncomfortable. I defended her mistakes. I softened consequences. I convinced myself that protecting her was the same thing as loving her. Standing there beside the lake, I finally understood how wrong I had been. Love without accountability had helped create this moment. I took a slow breath. Emily, I said quietly, I spent most of my life trying to make things easier for you. Tears filled her eyes. Mom, please. I shook my head gently.
No.
Today you need to listen. The entire ceremony space remained silent. I paid for this wedding because I wanted you to be happy. I supported you because I believed in you. I defended you because you are my daughter. But none of those things gave you the right to treat people with cruelty. Emily looked down.
For the first time, she had no response.
What hurts most is not the dress, I continued. It is not the missing wig. It is realizing that while I was celebrating you, you were quietly resenting me. A tear slipped down her cheek. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Old habits die hard. But I remained where I was. Some lessons cannot be learned if someone rushes in to remove the consequences. Daniel stepped back from the altar area. He looked exhausted. I think we all need time, he said. Nobody argued. One by one, guests began leaving their seats. There was no dramatic scene.
No shouting. No chaos.
Just disappointment. Quiet disappointment. In many ways, it was more painful than anger. Within 30 minutes, the ceremony space was nearly empty. Families gathered their belongings. Vendors packed equipment. Conversations stayed low and subdued. The wedding that had taken months to plan ended without vows, without celebration, and without applause. Rose eventually joined me near the lakeshore. We watched the remaining guests drift away. Are you all right? She asked. I considered the question carefully. Then I nodded. I think so. And surprisingly, it was true. I was sad.
Deeply sad.
But I was no longer carrying confusion. The truth had finally stepped into the light. Later that afternoon, as I prepared to leave the hotel, a staff member approached carrying a familiar bag. Inside was my wig. It had been recovered from a storage room. I looked at it for several seconds before smiling softly. Then I placed it back in the bag. For the first time in years, I felt no need to hide anything about myself. As I walked toward the exit, I passed a large mirror in the lobby. I stopped briefly and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked older than she had that morning. But she also looked stronger. Not because she had won. Not because someone else had lost. Because she had finally stopped sacrificing her dignity to protect a lie. I picked up my suitcase, stepped through the hotel doors, and walked into the afternoon sunlight. Behind me, an unfinished wedding faded into memory. Ahead of me was something far more valuable.
Peace.